The Battle of Bannockburn, 1314. Edward II, King of England, invaded Scotland with a force of 25,000 men, the largest army to ever invade Scotland, and marched on Stirling Castle. But the English found their path blocked by a Scottish army led by Robert the Bruce, King of Scots. A legendary battle for Scottish independence was about to unfold. In 1286, Alexander III, King of Scotland, died with no heir, starting a crisis with several families making claims to the throne. In order to avoid a civil war, the Scottish nobility asked the King of England, Edward I, Longshanks, to arbitrate the dispute. Eager to extend his royal authority, the English king agreed to assist, but in exchange, demanded Scotland become a vassal of England. In 1292, judgment was given in favor of John Balliol, who in March 1296 renounced his homage to England. In response, Edward launched an invasion of Scotland and inflicted a crushing defeat on the Scots at the Battle of Dunbar. By July, Edward had forced John Balliol to flee, and Scotland was all but conquered, with the remaining Scottish nobles being forced to give homage. After the English king extended his dominion over Scotland, there was widespread discontent. Many Scots targeted local English officials, and in 1297, the country erupted in open revolt. In September, Scottish forces led by William Wallace won a heroic victory over the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, but a year later, in 1298, were heavily defeated by the English at the Battle of Falkirk. By 1304, Scotland had been conquered. Wallace was still at large in Scotland, but unlike all the other nobles and bishops, he refused to pay homage to the English. Eventually being captured by the English in August 1305, Wallace was taken to London and put on trial for treason. He was found guilty and executed, hanged, drawn, and quartered, with his head placed on a spike on London Bridge. The death of Wallace was a great tragedy, and all Scottish patriots mourned his death. Yet Scotland was not broken, and their struggle for independence was far from over. Although Robert the Bruce had openly sworn loyalty to the English king, his true allegiance lay with his countrymen, and he was committed to Scottish independence. He secretly plotted against the English. He entered into a pact with his friend, the Bishop of St. Andrews, William Lamberton. Seeing much potential in Robert the Bruce, Lamberton urged Bruce to pursue his claim to the Scottish throne and unite the Scottish clans against their English occupiers. In 1306, Robert eliminated his main rival, John Comyn, and 6 weeks later, on the 25th of March, 1306, Robert the Bruce was crowned as King of the Scots in Scone. He then embarked on a new campaign to free Scotland, once and for all. Enraged by Bruce's coronation and the killing of John Comyn, the elderly English king Edward I appointed Aymer de Valence, Earl of Pembroke, as special lieutenant for Scotland, and gave orders to show no mercy, that all Scots bearing arms were to be executed without trial. Pembroke moved quickly north and launched a surprise attack on Bruce's army near Methven. During the battle at Methven, the Scottish king was unhorsed 3 times, almost captured, and barely escaped with his life, suffering a shattering defeat that left many of the king's most loyal followers dead or executed. Robert was forced to flee as an outlaw to the island of Arran. 3 of his brothers were executed, and his wife, his sisters, and daughter were all captured and imprisoned by the English. In 1307, Determined for redemption, Bruce returned with his followers to mainland Scotland, soundly defeating an English army at the Battle of Loudon Hill. The Scottish also had a timely stroke of good luck when the English King Edward I, Longshanks, the Hammer of Scots, died in 1307. His son and successor, Edward II, was crowned king, but he lacked the same military prowess and strong leadership abilities of his father. Edward II became embroiled in a dispute with the English nobility over his relationship with Piers Gaveston, and this greatly distracted the English king, taking his focus away from Scotland. Robert the Bruce pressed his advantage. He demanded the allegiance of all remaining Scottish nobles. By 1314, he had recaptured almost all of the historically Scottish territories from the English, leaving only the castles of Bothwell and Stirling. Stirling was a particularly strategically important castle held by the English, as it stood on the route north that led into the Scottish Highlands. So, Robert the Bruce sent his remaining younger brother, Edward Bruce, to lay siege to Stirling Castle. The commander of the castle, Philip Mowbray, made an agreement with Bruce that if the castle was not relieved by midsummer, he would surrender the castle to the Scots. When the English king learned of this, he mustered a huge army, intending to invade Scotland and relieve Stirling Castle. Edward's army included 2,000 heavily armored cavalry, including knights, and at least 20,000 infantry and archers, including longbows and crossbowmen from England, Wales, and Ireland. Assembling at Berwick, the English army then marched north towards Stirling, determined to relieve the castle. Edward II ordered his army to march double time, marching 70 miles in 1 week. This decision led to horses and infantry becoming extremely fatigued, but the English army was massive, outnumbering the Scottish by more than 2 to 1. Robert the Bruce knew the English were coming. He moved his army quickly south of Stirling, where he waited, positioning his army near the forest of New Park, along the old Roman road. The Scottish army numbered around 7,000 men total, and was divided into 4 divisions. The Scottish vanguard was commanded by Thomas Randolph, 1st Earl of Moray, while the Scottish king commanded the rear guard at the entrance to the New Park. The king's brother, Edward Bruce, commanded a division of his own, and the 4th Division was under the joint command of Walter the Steward and Sir James Douglas. Robert the Bruce trained his men to use schiltron tactics, using tight, compact formations of troops, forming a wall of spears, or phalanx. These tactics used by the Scottish pike formations previously proved very effective against the English cavalry at Loudon Hill. Robert's goal was to use these spear tactics once again to finally decisively beat the English in open battle, in order to legitimize his kingship and free his kingdom from the English. Edward the Bruce, Earl of Carrick, was Robert the Bruce's only surviving younger brother, and heir to the throne. A veteran fighter, Edward was a key figure in the previous years of guerrilla warfare the Scots had waged against the English, besieging and capturing a number of castles in western Scotland. Thomas Randolph, Earl of Moray, was one of Robert the Bruce's most trusted and capable commanders. He was a loyal and well-known supporter of Bruce, known for leading a daring night attack that recaptured Edinburgh Castle from the English in 1314. One of the most dangerous and legendary Scottish leaders was James Douglas. His father fought with William Wallace and died with him in the Tower of London, after which his family's lands were confiscated by the English and given to the Clifford family. He joined forces with Bruce in 1307 and became known by the English as Black Douglas for his ruthless tactics, as he regularly burned crops, slaughtered livestock, and spread fear amongst the English with his brutality. Leading a schiltron together with Douglas was the young, beardless, but eager Walter Stewart. The Stewarts were a powerful Scottish family who had the honor of being stewards to the king. Angus MacDonald of Islay also accompanied the king's forces. The leader of the MacDonald clan was a valued ally of Robert Bruce. He protected Bruce and his men when he was an outlaw in 1306. Also, with the Scottish army was a small force of 500 cavalry, led by Robert Keith, the Marshal of Scotland. Keith was previously captured by the English in 1300, but by 1308 he was back in Scotland, fighting for Bruce. The English army was led by the English king Edward II, described as tall, strong, and handsome. He lacked his father's political and military skills and was not very popular among the English nobility, and was not a particularly skilled military commander, nor did he seem to have much interest in military affairs, choosing instead to place his trust with his advisors. In the English king's bodyguard was Aymer de Valence, 2nd Earl of Pembroke. Aymer was an Anglo-French nobleman, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men of his age, and a veteran of the wars with Scotland. Also in the king's personal bodyguard was Gilles d'Argenton. For his time, Gilles was considered to be the third best knight in all of Europe. It was said that the only two men that could match him in strength and skill were Robert the Bruce and the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VII. He was a jousting champion, winning many tournaments, and also went on a crusade to the east, during which he was captured by the Byzantine Emperor. But King Edward valued him as a knight and promptly paid his ransom so he could accompany him on the march to Bannockburn. The English vanguard was led jointly by Gilbert de Clare, 8th Earl of Gloucester, and Humphrey de Bohun, 4th Earl of Hereford. The 23-year-old young and ambitious Earl of Gloucester was related to both kings, as he was the nephew of the English king and the brother-in-law of Robert the Bruce. Humphrey de Bohun, the Earl of Hereford, was a skilled knight and was also related to the English king Edward as his brother-in-law. As Constable of England, he was a seasoned veteran in the wars against the Scottish, and was a talented jousting champion. Hereford quarreled with Gloucester over who should lead the vanguard, so the king decided that the duty should be shared between the two men. Hereford's nephew, Henry de Bohun, was also present with the vanguard. Henry, young and impulsive, was eager to make his mark on the battlefield. Robert of Clifford, 1st Baron of Clifford, was another prominent English commander. Appointed by Edward I to guard the English border in 1296, he fought at the Battle of Falkirk in 1298. For his loyalty, Edward granted him the lands which were taken from Douglas, and James Douglas was determined to win them back. Not all Scots fought with Robert the Bruce. Some sided with the English. John Comyn was one of these men. The Comyn family were arch rivals with Bruce, and Comyn's great-uncle was John Balliol. After his father was killed by Bruce in 1306, the young Comyn was taken in by Edward I. Now, he was eager to win back his family lands from Bruce and avenge his father's death. Through his grandmother, Eleanor, he also had a weak claim to the Scottish throne. Alexander Seton was another Scottish knight who sided with King Edward in order to protect his lands, which were located on the border territories, and therefore vulnerable to English raids. On June 23rd, the scouting party led by Robert Keith spotted the English army advancing over the plain south of the Bannockburn stream. Leading in the front were two English cavalry formations, commanded by Gloucester and Hereford. To the east, marching closer to the River Forth, was a smaller detachment of roughly 300 men led by Sir Robert Clifford. Both of these attachments marched in front of the main fighting force and were tasked with lifting the siege at Stirling. After crossing over the stream, the detachment of Hereford and Gloucester continued up the road towards the woodlands that concealed the Scottish army. As they came closer, they spotted the Scottish infantry and began to form up for battle. Henry de Bohun saw the Scottish king, who had ventured out ahead of his troops. Not only was the Scottish king isolated, away from the protection of his troops, but he also was not fully armed for combat, with only a light horse and an axe to defend himself. Henry de Bohun, realizing the Scottish king was vulnerable, seized his chance for glory. He lowered his lance and charged at Bruce, full tilt. Robert the Bruce could have retreated back to the safety of his men, but he did not. Instead, he chose to face his challenger and charged out to meet him. At the last second, Bruce swiftly maneuvered his horse to the side, dodging the lance of Bohun, who just barely missed the king. He then stood up in his stirrups and swung his axe into the knight's head, breaking his helmet and his skull, killing him instantly. Seeing his nephew cut down, Hereford ordered his cavalry to charge the enemy, followed by Gloucester.
Charge! Charge! Pike men, guard this position! Charge!
The cavalry of Gloucester and Hereford charged directly into the Scottish line of spears and took heavy casualties. Many knights were impaled by the pikes, and some were killed by pit traps which the Scottish had laid on both sides of the road. Gloucester lost his horse beneath him. Unable to break the Scots, they began to pull back and retreated back across the Bannockburn. At the same time, the detachment of Robert Clifford had almost advanced past the Scottish position entirely before they were intercepted by the schiltron of Thomas Randolph. Clifford's knights met a similar fate. They managed to surround Randolph's formation, but were unable to break the Scottish wall of spears. The knights became frustrated and began throwing their weapons at the Scottish in a desperate attempt to break their formation. After hours of grueling combat, the division of James Douglas advanced to reinforce Moray, and the English cavalry of Clifford finally had enough, and they too began to fall back. With nightfall approaching, the English army made camp for the night. Likewise, the Scottish army retired to their camp in the forest, and Robert the Bruce called his officers together to hold a council of war. While they had managed to hold off the English during the day, the English army was still largely intact, and Robert knew that another pitched battle with the English would be risky. He considered withdrawing further into the forest, where the English would not be able to easily follow. But during the night, one Scottish knight, who fought for the English, Alexander Seton, switched sides, snuck away from the English army during the night, and made his way to the Scottish camp. There, he told Robert the Bruce that the morale of the English was in tatters. He encouraged Bruce not to retreat, saying that if he attacked the English again the next day, they would win the battle. The next day, on the morning of June 24th, Edward ordered his men to form up for battle, placing cavalry in the front with infantry behind. The English had not yet decided on the next course of action. Gloucester recommended caution, recommending that Edward avoid battle that day, but this drew accusations of cowardice by other officers who advised attack. Edward grew angry and accused Gloucester of treason. Gloucester responded that he would prove his loyalty on the field of battle. Not long after daybreak, Robert ordered his men to advance from the forest, and Edward was shocked to see the Scottish pikemen emerge from the cover of the woods, and advancing directly towards his position. As the Scottish army drew nearer, the men paused and knelt in prayer, and many young men were knighted. Gloucester, eager to redeem his reputation, lowered his lance and charged the enemy. When he reached the Scottish lines, he was dehorsed, surrounded, and killed. The rest of the English army under Clifford, Hereford, and the English king also rushed the Scots, smashing into the Scottish lines.
Charge!
The English cavalry charges gradually lost momentum and were unable to break the Scottish formations. The Scottish held firm and began to advance against the English, slowly pushing them back. English longbowmen attempted to support their knights, but were ordered to stop shooting as they were causing casualties among their own. The English archers then redeployed to the north across the Pell Stream and began firing on the Scottish flank. Sir Robert Keith quickly took his 500 horsemen and charged the archers, quickly dispersing them. Now the English cavalry was hemmed in against the Bannockburn. English infantry advancing in the rear had now joined the battle, filling in gaps between the cavalry or standing behind them, which effectively trapped the cavalry, giving them limited space to maneuver. Robert the Bruce and Angus MacDonald charged into the fray with their reserves, and Robert personally took part in the fighting. The exhausting melee raged on for hours. Finally, the English formation was broken, and many men began to panic and flee. It soon became clear to Aymer de Valence and Gilles d'Argenton that the English had lost the battle, and the English king needed to be led to safety. They seized the reins of the king's horse and dragged him away, followed by the withdrawal of 500 knights of the royal bodyguard. Gilles d'Argenton then turned to the king and said, "Sire, your protection was committed to me, but since you are safely on your way, I will bid you farewell, for never yet have I fled from battle, nor will I now." Close quote. He then turned his horse and charged back towards the Scottish, where he was overwhelmed and slain. Edward fled with his personal bodyguard, and panic spread, turning the English retreat into a full-blown rout. King Edward first fled for Stirling Castle, where Sir Philip Mowbray, commander of the castle, turned him away, as the castle would shortly be surrendered to the Scottish. He was then pursued by James Douglas and a small group of Scottish horsemen, but they failed to capture the English king, who made it to Dunbar Castle. About 11,000 English infantrymen were killed, with many English nobles being taken prisoner and exchanged for ransom. The Scottish losses were comparatively light. After the battle, Humphrey de Bohun, Earl of Hereford, fled to English-controlled Bothwell Castle, but found himself trapped when the castle switched sides and handed him over to the Scottish. He was exchanged for ransom in return for many important prisoners held by the English, which led to Bruce finally being reunited with his wife Elizabeth, his daughter Marjorie, and his sisters. Robert the Bruce had truly won a great victory. The Pope finally recognized Bruce as King of Scots in 1320. When Robert the Bruce invaded the north of England, he forced Edward III of England to sign the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton on May 1st, 1328, which finally recognized the independence of Scotland, with Robert the Bruce as king. Fearsome in battle and a brilliant tactician, Robert the Bruce has surely gone down in history as one of Scotland's most inspiring leaders, and his victory at the Battle of Bannockburn, one of the most celebrated and pivotal moments in Scottish history.